Boy dies, returns from death, with a horrifying warning from heaven. Imagine going beyond this life, experiencing something utterly extraordinary, and coming back with a message that changes everything. Well, that's exactly what happened in this chilling account. Stay tuned as I share the incredible details and break down the warning he brought back. One that involves none other than President Donald Trump. This is the story of Ethan. Let's dive in.
My name is Ethan, and I was only 10 years old when I died. Until that day, I was just like any other kid, curious, full of energy, and always looking for my next adventure. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind where the world feels alive and buzzing with possibility. I remember it so clearly because it started out like any other day. My friends and I were racing our bikes down the quiet streets of our neighborhood, laughing and shouting as we pushed ourselves faster and faster. We didn't have a care in the world. But in a single moment, everything shifted. I can still hear the screech of tires, the sharp metallic thud, and the way the world seemed to go silent immediately afterward. I had darted across the street, not realizing that a car was coming around the corner. The driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I don't remember the impact itself. It was as if my mind blocked it out. All I knew was darkness. My parents told me later that I was thrown several feet and hit the pavement hard. When the paramedics arrived, they said my heart had stopped. My body lay motionless on the ground, and for a moment, it seemed like that was it. My life was over. Neighbors rushed out of their houses, gathering around as my mom's screams filled the air. People were praying, crying, and watching helplessly as the paramedics worked tirelessly to revive me. At the time, though, I wasn't aware of any of that. Instead, I found myself somewhere else entirely. It's hard to put into words, but I'll try. I felt like I was floating, weightless, and there was no pain, no fear, just a strange calm. I remember thinking that it was odd how peaceful I felt, given the chaos that must have been happening around me. It was as though I had stepped out of my body and into a completely different realm. My parents later told me that I had no pulse for several minutes. The doctors said it was a miracle I even survived, let alone came back without any brain damage. But what they didn't understand, what no one could understand, was that during those moments when my heart wasn't beating, I was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I can only describe as beyond. That was the beginning of an experience that would change not only my life, but the lives of everyone who heard my story. I didn't know it at the time, but those few minutes would carry a message, a warning that I would spend the rest of my life trying to share. And it all started that day when the light faded and I stepped into something so much bigger than I could have ever imagined. When the darkness around me lifted, I found myself in a place that words can't fully describe. At first, I didn't know where I was or what had happened. I just knew it wasn't the world I had left behind. The air felt different, lighter, warmer, almost alive. I wasn't standing on anything solid, but I wasn't falling either. It was as if I were suspended in space, weightless and free. I felt calm, like every worry or fear I had ever known had been wiped away. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a knowing, a deep sense that I was safe. The first thing I noticed was the light. It wasn't like the sunlight we see here on Earth. This was something else entirely. It was everywhere, surrounding me and filling me at the same time. It wasn't blinding or harsh, but it was incredibly bright, as though the entire world was glowing. The light wasn't just something I could see, it felt alive, almost like it was reaching out to me, wrapping around me like a warm hug. I didn't need to be told that this place was special. I just knew. As I took it all in, I became aware that I wasn't alone. There were others there, though I didn't see them at first. I could feel their presence before I could see them. It was like they were watching me, but not in a way that made me feel uneasy. It was comforting, like they were happy I was there. Slowly, figures began to take shape in the light. They didn't look like people in the way we think of people, but I knew they were beings. Their forms were soft and glowing, almost like they were made of the same light that surrounded us. They didn't speak to me with words, but somehow, I understood them perfectly. One of them stepped closer. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like I recognized them, even though I had never seen them before. It wasn't like recognizing someone's face. It was deeper, like their very presence was familiar. They radiated love and peace in a way that made me feel completely at ease. I didn't feel scared or confused anymore. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Without saying anything, this being showed me things. I don't mean they pointed things out or physically showed me something. I mean images and feelings flooded into me all at once. I saw moments from my life. Some I remembered, and some I didn't. I saw the people I loved, their faces so vivid it felt like I could reach out and touch them. I felt their love for me and my love for them in a way that was so much stronger than anything I had ever felt before. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. Then the images changed. I saw things I didn't understand, scenes of people I had never met, places I had never been. Some of it was beautiful, like the light-filled place I was in, but some of it wasn't. I saw darkness creeping over the world, like a shadow. I saw people fighting, their faces twisted with anger and fear. I felt their pain as if it were my own. It was so real, so vivid, that I couldn't look away. I wanted to ask the being what it all meant, but before I could, I felt another wave of images and feelings. This time, it was a warning. I didn't hear words, but I understood the message clearly. Something was coming, a great change, something that would test everyone, was on its way. I felt an urgency, like I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. The being didn't explain it to me. They just looked at me with so much love and sadness in their eyes, and I knew this was something I couldn't ignore. Then I felt a pull, like something was calling me back. I didn't want to leave. The peace and love I felt in that place were unlike anything I had ever known, and the idea of going back to the world seemed almost unbearable. But the pull grew stronger, and I realized I didn't have a choice. The being gave me one last look, and though they didn't speak, I knew they were telling me it wasn't my time yet. They wanted me to take the message back. The light around me grew brighter and brighter until it was all I could see. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light was gone, and I was back in my body, gasping for air as though I had been underwater. My chest ached, my head spun, and I could hear my mom sobbing somewhere nearby. I didn't understand everything that had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I had been somewhere real, somewhere that would stay with me forever. And I had returned with a message the world needed to hear. When I opened my eyes, I was back. The world felt heavy, solid, and so different from the place I had just been. I was lying on something hard, the ground, I realized, and everything around me was loud and chaotic. I could hear the distant wail of sirens, the frantic voices of my parents, and someone shouting instructions. My chest burned, my body ached, and every breath felt like a struggle. It took a moment for me to understand that I had survived. I didn't speak right away. My parents were leaning over me, crying and holding my hand, while paramedics worked quickly to get me onto a stretcher. The look on their faces was something I'll never forget. It was a mix of overwhelming relief and disbelief. I could feel their love, but there was also something else lingering in the back of my mind. The message. It was as if the words and images from that place had been seared into my soul, impossible to ignore or forget. They rushed me to the hospital, and as doctors and nurses worked around me, I started to piece together what had happened. I overheard snippets of conversations, words like miracle, no pulse, and cardiac arrest. I learned that I'd been clinically dead for several minutes. To everyone around me, it seemed like a medical mystery that I had come back at all, let alone without any apparent damage. But to me, it wasn't a mystery. I knew I'd been sent back for a reason. It wasn't until much later, when the doctors had left and my parents were sitting quietly by my bedside, that I finally spoke about it. I didn't know how to start. How do you explain something like that to people who weren't there? I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they'd think I had imagined it all. But the memory of the light, the beings, and the message was too strong to keep to myself. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice hoarse and shaky. My parents looked at me, their eyes wide with concern. When I was gone, I wasn't really gone. I was somewhere else. My mom reached for my hand, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," she said softly, but I shook my head. I needed to get it out. "I saw something," I continued. "It wasn't just a dream or my imagination. It was real. I was in a place filled with light, and there were these beings. They showed me things, and they gave me a message." I paused, trying to find the right words. "It's a warning. Something is coming." My dad leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean, a warning? What kind of warning?" I took a deep breath, the weight of what I was about to say pressing down on me. "They showed me the world, our world, and how it's changing. They said there's a leader, someone who will rise up and divide people. This person will bring out the best and the worst in humanity, and it's going to be a test for everyone. They didn't tell me exactly what would happen, but they made it clear that it's going to affect everyone." My parents exchanged a worried glance. I could tell they were trying to process what I was saying, but it probably sounded like the ramblings of a scared kid who had just been through something traumatic. Still, I could see a flicker of belief in their eyes. Maybe it was because of how certain I sounded. Or maybe it was because they wanted to believe that my survival had some greater purpose. Over the next few days, I tried to make sense of what I had seen. The images and feelings were so vivid, but they came in fragments that were hard to piece together. I kept seeing a shadow spreading over the world, dark and oppressive. I saw people arguing, fighting, and turning against each other. But there were also moments of hope. People coming together, standing up for what was right, and choosing love over fear. It was as if the future wasn't set in stone, like there were different paths the world could take depending on the choices we made. The most unsettling part was the figure I saw, the leader. I didn't know who they were at the time, but I could feel their presence so clearly. They were powerful, larger than life, and their actions would shape everything. The beings hadn't told me whether this leader was good or bad. They only said that this person's influence would force humanity to face its deepest truths. It wasn't just about the leader. It was about how we as people would respond. I started telling more people about my experience, but not everyone believed me. Some dismissed it as a hallucination or a side effect of being so close to death. Others were intrigued but didn't know what to make of it. A few, though, listened intently and seemed to understand that what I was saying wasn't just a story, it was a warning. As time passed, I began to feel the weight of what I had seen more heavily. I was just a kid, and yet I had been given this enormous responsibility. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. The message wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. And deep down, I knew the events I'd been shown were already starting to unfold. Years passed, and life moved forward. But the memory of what I had seen and felt in that other place never left me. I was just a kid when it happened, but as I grew older, I started to see the world differently. It was like I had been given a lens that allowed me to see the patterns, the connections, and the underlying tensions that most people ignored. The warning I'd received stayed with me, a constant whisper in the back of my mind. I couldn't help but wonder if the leader I'd seen in my vision was already among us, quietly rising to power. Then, the 2016 election happened, and Donald Trump became the President of the United States. I remember watching the news that night, my stomach in knots. It wasn't that I had a strong opinion about him at the time. I was still trying to understand the weight of what I had seen all those years ago. But there was something about the way people reacted to him that struck a chord deep inside me. The division, the arguments, the sheer intensity of emotion he stirred in people. It felt eerily similar to the images I had been shown during my near-death experience. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment I had been warned about. The figure I had seen in my vision, the one who would rise and divide, wasn't just a vague symbol anymore. I couldn't say for certain, but I felt a deep, unsettling certainty that Donald Trump was the leader I had been shown. It wasn't about whether he was good or bad. It was about what his presence meant for humanity as a whole. He was a catalyst, someone whose actions would force people to confront their deepest fears, beliefs, and values. As the months went on, I started to notice how much of what I had seen in that other place was coming to life. The shadow I had been shown, the darkness creeping over the world, wasn't just about one person. It was about the way people reacted to each other, the way fear and anger spread like wildfire. I saw families torn apart over political arguments, friendships shattered because of differing opinions, and a level of hostility in the world that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just about politics. It was deeper than that. It was about how people treated each other when faced with uncertainty and fear. I started to think more about what the beings in the light had shown me. They hadn't told me whether this leader was good or evil. They had only said that his rise would bring about a test, a moment of reckoning for humanity. At first, I didn't understand what they meant by that. But as I watched the world react to Trump's presidency, it started to make sense. He wasn't the cause of the division. He was the mirror reflecting it back at us. He forced people to confront their own beliefs, their own values, and their own willingness to choose love over fear. What struck me the most was how polarizing he was. People either loved him or hated him, and there seemed to be no middle ground. It reminded me of the images I had seen in my vision, people arguing, shouting, and turning against each other. But there were also moments of hope, just like in my vision. I saw people coming together in ways they hadn't before, standing up for what they believed in, and fighting for justice and equality. It was like the world was being split into two paths, and humanity was being forced to choose which one to follow. One night, I had a long conversation with my mom about it. She had always been supportive of me, even when she didn't fully understand the weight of what I had experienced. "Do you really think he's the one from your vision?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it feels like it. It's not just about him. It's about what he represents. It's about how we as people respond to him and to each other." The beings didn't tell me everything, but they made it clear that this leader would be a test. And I think we're living through that test right now. She nodded, her eyes filled with both concern and understanding. "So, what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But what I do know is that the choices we make during this time will shape the future in ways we can't even begin to imagine. The beings showed me a world where darkness spread unchecked, where fear and anger consumed everything. But they also showed me a world where people came together, where love and compassion triumphed over hate. It wasn't up to one person to decide which path we take. It was up to all of us. Donald Trump's presidency wasn't just a political moment. It was a spiritual and moral reckoning. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that the choices we make matter. And as much as it scared me to see the world so divided, I also saw hope. I saw people choosing kindness, standing up for what's right, and refusing to let fear dictate their actions. In the end, I think that's the real message the beings wanted me to share. It's not about one leader or one moment in time. It's about how we respond to the challenges we face. We're being tested, not just by the events happening around us, but by our own hearts and minds. And the outcome of that test depends on each and every one of us. After everything I had seen and experienced, I couldn't stop thinking about what came next. The vision I was given wasn't just about a single moment or person. It was a glimpse into the unfolding of something much bigger, something that could either lift us up or tear us apart. What haunted me most wasn't the shadow creeping over the world, but the realization that it was still growing. It wasn't inevitable, though. That was the part that kept me awake at night, the part that gave me both hope and fear. The beings had shown me two paths, and now, as I watched the world react to everything happening, I couldn't help but wonder which one we were choosing. I started paying closer attention to the world around me, not just in the news, but in everyday life. There were so many moments where people were faced with choices, small ones, big ones, decisions that might not seem important in the moment, but would ripple out in ways they couldn't see. A kind word or a harsh comment, a helping hand or turning away, standing up for someone or staying silent. Every choice seemed to matter more now, like we were all part of a massive invisible scale, and every action was tipping it one way or the other. The part that scared me most was how easily people gave in to fear. I saw it everywhere, in how they talked to each other, in how they looked at strangers, in how quickly they jumped to anger. It was like the shadow I'd seen in my vision wasn't just something external. It was inside of us, feeding on our worst instincts. And the leader I'd seen, the one I now believed was Donald Trump, wasn't creating the shadow. He was amplifying it. He was a spark, but the fire was already there, waiting to be lit. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the hope I'd seen. I started noticing the people who were pushing back against the darkness, not with anger, but with love and compassion. They weren't loud or dramatic about it, but they were there, quietly holding the line against the spread of fear. I saw teachers staying late to help struggling students, neighbors coming together to support each other, and strangers reaching out to offer kindness in moments of need. It was like they were tiny lights in the growing shadow, and even though they seemed small, their light was powerful. One night, I sat down with my dad and told him everything that was weighing on me. He listened patiently, the way he always did, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. "You've been carrying this for a long time," he said, "but Ethan, you have to remember, none of us can fix the whole world on our own. All we can do is make our own corner of it better." I thought about that for a long time after our conversation. The beings hadn't given me a specific task or mission. They hadn't told me how to stop the shadow or what to do about the leader. They had just shown me what could happen and sent me back with the knowledge that we still had a choice. Maybe that was the point. Maybe it wasn't about one big act of heroism, but about all of the small choices we make every day. Maybe it was about tipping the scale one small act of kindness at a time. I started talking more openly about my experience, even though it wasn't always easy. Some people listened, their eyes wide with curiosity or understanding. Others dismissed me outright, saying it was just a dream or a figment of my imagination. At first, the skepticism hurt, but then I realized it didn't matter. I wasn't sharing my story to convince people. I was sharing it because I felt like I had to. Like the message wasn't mine to keep. If even one person heard it and chose love over fear because of it, then maybe that was enough. As the years went on, I saw more and more of what the beings had shown me coming to life. The divisions grew deeper, the arguments louder, and the shadow darker. But I also saw the light. I saw people standing up for what they believed in, not with hate, but with courage and compassion. I saw communities coming together in ways they hadn't before, people finding common ground in the midst of chaos. It wasn't perfect, it never is, but it was enough to remind me that the future isn't set in stone. What comes next? That's the question that keeps me going. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think anyone does. The beings didn't show me the final outcome, because there isn't one. Not yet. It's still being written, shaped by the choices we make every day. I believe that's why I was sent back. Not to predict the future, but to remind people that they have the power to shape it. I don't know what will happen with Donald Trump or the world leaders who come after him. I don't know if the shadow will continue to grow, or if the light will finally push it back. But I do know this. We're all part of it. Every action, every word, every choice matters. The beings didn't tell me what to do. They told all of us. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that even the smallest light can make a difference in the darkest places. So now, I keep moving forward, sharing my story, and trying to live by the message I was given. It's not always easy, and there are days when the weight of it feels overwhelming. But then I remember the light I saw, the love and peace that filled that place, and I know it's worth it. We're not just being tested, we're being given a chance, and I believe with all my heart that we still have the power to choose the path of light.